Okay guys, we're going to get into that Korina Flying V in a moment. That's one of the guitars I was so excited to go and try. But if you haven't seen this series so far, this is part 3 of my shopping trip to Peach Guitars, which happened last week. Now, I want you to go and watch the first video and the second video. I'll link the first video up here if you haven't seen any of them. I think it's good fun, and it'll be better if you watch that and you can get the whole story. So I'm not going to give away anything that happened before right now. We're going to keep moving forward, but basically safe to say I have revealed something quite important before this, and the fact of the matter is that I sat there in Peach Guitars and I said, look, I probably don't have budget left, but let me try a few things, because you just don't know that if you find something that completely, blindsides you, then there are ways of figuring stuff out, right? Okay, let's hear this Flying V and we'll talk more about it in a second. And that's it. That's all you need to do to find out that a guitar is not for you. You can walk into that shop, see something on the wall, and you think, yeah, man, that is so me. What if I could play a Korina Flying V and that was like my main guitar? I mean, since Albert King, who has done that? That shape has become more synonymous with sort of like heavy metal and stuff like that. And yet, in this sort of beautifully primitive vintage look, it's one of the more stunning guitars that, to me. As soon as I opened the case, though, I somehow knew it wouldn't work for me. It's not about comfort. I was actually quite comfortable with it. I can't play it through the legs. That's not going to work for me. But sat up like that, I'm a reasonably big guy anyway, so it sort of wasn't unwieldy for me to put it up on my leg. But I kept in that sort of confused playing, because that's what happens when you don't like the guitar. And you can't force it on yourself, and you can't force it on the guitar, right? It's a shame. Beautiful guitar. If there was like a cheap version, fine, but 10 grand, this would have to be your number one. And well, I'm saying it would have to be. You could be mega wealthy, but for me, this would have to be my number one. It'd have to be so my thing that I never wanted to play anything else, and it wasn't. So in this series, we've learned that actually I've done a lot of ordering online before, and that's something I'm probably going to do a lot less of, because just seeing and visualizing is not enough. And also, once you receive the guitar, there's a lot of inertia to actually want to send it back. So it's it's not the same as falling in love with it in the shop and thinking I've got to sort this out. But look, this story it continues to still surprise me, because I'm like sitting there. You can see I've chosen. If you haven't seen the other parts, you should have already gone over to the other video. So there's going to be spoilers now. I've got this. I've got this at home. So why are we still talking? Yeah, well, I needed to try an R0 because I've got my R9 that I love and I do a lot of content around it. And it's not a perfect guitar by any stretch, and that's why I love it, because it's not the most resonant, the most sustainy, but it's got so much character to its sound. And I always said to myself, I'm going to one day have an R9, an R0, an R8, a gold top R7, and probably a Black Beauty, and, you know, we're talking down the line. So could I find the R0? Let's find out. Cool. Oh, that's nice. So this is a 60 reissue.
That's right. Yeah.
So I noticed when they did the 60th anniversary, right, they had the V1, V2, V3.
Yes.
Which would this be?
That's V2.
Oh, okay, that's the good one.
So that's not the skinniest that they
No.
do, but slimmer than a 59.
Right.
Oh, I love these Flying Vs.
Oh, that is so cool.
So, something about them, something about the sound.
Yeah. The thing about Masterbuilt is, you know, that the SG, you know, probably this, I'd really want them, but that's going to be here once. So if I walk away today, that'll be the one.
Yeah.
And I can order one of these online and be happy with it, you know, from you guys.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, those are super cool. Yeah, I was speaking to someone how and he is Flying V connoisseur, shall we say?
Yeah.
He's got a collection, and
Oh wow.
these Korina ones, you know, you just never see them anymore.
No.
It's so hard to get white Korina like this. But saying about the pickup placement is different. So the bridge pickup is slightly towards the
Okay.
quite as far as a Les Paul, I think, something like that, which goes adds to the sound. Just that much good, I think.
Yeah.
It's a bit hard to get on the stand. So.
Fair enough. Oh, this is nice and clear sounding, isn't it? Okay, so that's how it looks when you get on with the guitar straight away compared to the Korina Flying V, which I just sadly didn't. Now I'm sitting here playing thinking, hang on a minute. I already fell in love with that gold SG that you could see behind me, and I picked the Masterbuilt Strat over it. And do I do something a little bit crazy today? You know, in what direction am I going to go? I always have wanted a 1960. If anything, I wanted that more than an R9. Now, this is the V2, as mentioned earlier. and that means the neck is quite a lot thinner than an R9. Now, I love that. I've got quite big hands, but they're not humongous, and also I do get quite a lot of pain here from playing guitar, from doing weightlifting, and from doing woodwork. And so the thinner neck actually suits me just fine, and I do a lot of thumb over playing, you know, on a Les Paul. And so I'm sitting here going, well, I mean, at this point, I hadn't actually bought the Masterbuilt. It sat there, you know, I'm 99.9% sure. But what if I took the R0 and the Gold SG? Now, it'd be a little bit more than the Masterbuilt in cost, but not massively so. Now, this is a Murphy Lab ultra light aged R0, and I was very lucky because the price had been dropped on it. Now, I didn't know why originally, and then I asked later off camera, and someone had bought it during one of the lockdowns from abroad. They were in Singapore or something like that. They thought they were coming back to the UK really soon, and then it turns out they couldn't. But months and months went by whilst they ummed and ahed over it, and eventually it had been sat in the back of the warehouse after a long time, 8 months or 10 months, decided they couldn't take it. And so I think Peach just gave them the money back, or most of the money, I assume. And they dropped the price by about 25%. So actually it was more palatable than it would have been otherwise. Now, I'm not normally one for these more extravagant tops on the Les Pauls. I love my R9 is really understated. Let me get it. There. So this doesn't have one of those really deep flames, and I like the fact that you can see wood grain, and for me that's a really classy look, and I enjoy that. But that R0 was quite the opposite, and it has a really deep colour to it. You know, I guess it's like a tomato burst. Luckily, being a V2, it's still one of the ones that would fade eventually, as opposed to a V3, which would have a thinner neck and it wouldn't fade. So yeah, look, I had to play for another couple of minutes while I had to think about this. So, you know, this is, then I was trying to check what the sustain is like. Will it have too much sustain for me? Let's just play for another minute and try and get my mind straight here. It's all over the place. What sort of craziness am I going to do right now? you go. I thought I'd surprise you in the middle of that clip. One eagle-eyed viewer noticed this in the second video. I have this guitar in the background the whole time. This is the one, the Murphy Lab ultralight aged R0. Now, in a dream world, I'd probably have gone for the light aged, not the ultralight aged. But this is one of those where even if it wasn't a Murphy Lab, I wasn't looking for a Murphy Lab. In fact, I asked the guy after I'd sort of picked it up, I think. And yeah, it doesn't really matter. Here's the interesting bit. I was talking to Peach. Anyway, sorry, just quickly, this is an incredibly resonant guitar. Now, I don't know that playing an electric guitar acoustically really tells you everything, but maybe it does. Maybe I'm coming around to that. I've been having some conversations with people about it. This is much less muddy and much more resonant than my R9, and it's more acoustically resonant. So let's just take that, and from now on I'll be more of a convert. What I needed was a Les Paul that was vintage looking, vintage sounding, but a bit more coherent, articulate, less muddy than my R9. My R9 is the characterful sounding, much more characterful sounding one than any other Les Paul that I've played except the originals. But this is probably, you know, a better instrument. Certainly if I was in need of a Les Paul to make any sort of Les Paul sound, more modern sounds as well. But I love this neck. It's slightly thinner. Now, when I do a full comparison, I'll get the calipers out. We'll go all nerdy on it. You know, I think this is a brilliant neck, this V2. I wouldn't want too much thinner, so I'm interested in knowing what a V3 is like, but I don't have one. But yeah, safe to say, I sat there thinking while I was playing, do I push myself quite a lot? I know I'm buying the master built at this point because it's still the best guitar I've played that day, probably. But these are different realms. Strat and Les Paul are completely different. I have whole weeks of only wanting to play Strat, whole week of only wanting to play a Les Paul, whole months of only wanting to play one or the other. So in my brain, they occupy quite different parts. I mean, I went through 6 months of last year where I didn't want to play a Strat, and now recently I only want to play a Strat most of the time. So I knew I was getting that. And then there was that gold SG there, which was the wild card, the one that, you know, it's a bit different than all the others. And there's this. Do I fulfill? I found an R0 that actually sounds great and that I'd love to play. Can I leave it there? It's in my brain, it's probably a higher priority than the gold SG. So those thoughts you go through when you're shopping, in the end you've got to go with your gut. I'm just sort of like, what will I be saddest to leave behind? And my mind was made up. So I don't want to drag this out any more than it is, but there is going to be a part 4, and maybe not something you'll expect. So you should definitely tune in for that one. I hope you're enjoying this series. Not something I'll be able to make very often, but it's been a lot of fun for me to go and do this. In the last video, there's something else I need to do and show you, and then there'll also just be a few clips around Peach guitars as well. So yeah, thanks for watching, and you'll probably see the next video in a few hours. I'm not very patient when it comes to these series, and thanks to everyone who's been watching so far. Cheers.